I remember the first day I arrived in Primrose Gardens, a place that looked more like a luxury resort than a suburban neighborhood. Rows of pristine, pastel-colored houses stood proudly behind an elegant, wrought-iron gate. Well-trimmed hedges, neat lawns, and spotless sidewalks created an ambience of utter perfection. It was almost too perfect, in that uncanny way that sets a detective's instincts on edge. I'm Alec Morgan, recently transferred from a big city police department to the quiet confines of Stonebridge County. Though few people knew it, I had just been promoted to Chief Investigator of the Homicide Division. Officially, I told everyone I was a detective, which was true enough but didn't fully capture the gravity of my position. My work often involved high-profile murder cases, and I moved here looking for a less stressful life. If only a detective's life could ever be called less stressful. Primrose Gardens was managed by a homeowners association. My neighbor, an elderly man named Stanley Finch, shook his head good-naturedly when I asked him about the HOA on move-in day. He warned me that the association president was a force to be reckoned with. He added, in a conspiratorial whisper, "Watch out for Ms. Belinda Farnett, but everyone calls her Karen." He gave me a wry smile. "She means well, I guess, but she can be downright overbearing. Don't let her push you around." I chuckled, shrugged it off, and told myself that I'd handle it. After all, I had handled murderers, gangs, and hardened criminals for most of my career. How bad could a neighborhood busybody be? Looking back, I see how naive that thought was. Because soon enough, I was tangled in a web of petty rules, malicious rumors, and, eventually, a murder plot so brazen that even I was stunned by its audacity. But let's start at the beginning. Population, about 1,500. That was the note I'd scribbled in my leather-bound case notebook when I researched Primrose Gardens before moving in. My fiancée, Diana, was thrilled to relocate away from the hectic metropolis. She worked remotely as a legal consultant for a tech firm, so the picturesque calm of Stonebridge County appealed to her instantly. We moved in on a sunny Saturday morning. As I guided the last box into our modest two-story home, I heard a sharp rap on the open front door. A voice rang out, crisp and demanding. "Excuse me, new neighbor." I turned to find a woman in her early 50s, hairstyled in a severe shoulder-length bob, wearing a pastel blazer that seemed oddly formal for a casual weekend morning. In one hand, she clutched a glossy binder labeled Primrose Gardens HOA Guidelines. In the other hand, she held a metallic clipboard. A tight smile curved her lips, although her eyes didn't quite match its warmth. "You must be Miss Farnett," I guessed, extending my hand. "I'm Alec Morgan." She pressed the binder against her chest. "Yes, dear, but just call me Belinda," she replied. Her tone contained the faintest hint of condescension. Then, with a forced laugh, she added, "Although some of the neighbors like to call me Karen. You know how people can be, always making jokes. I'm sure you'll find me quite pleasant once you learn the ropes." I noted her careful phrasing, "once you learn the ropes." There it was, the subtext that I would have to abide by her rules, no exceptions. I had encountered many personalities in my line of work, and her type was instantly recognizable. Controlling, quick to judge, and convinced she knew better than everyone else. But I plastered on a polite smile. "I appreciate you stopping by." She launched into an introduction about the HOA. "We have a robust set of regulations to keep Primrose Gardens at its best. Lawns cut to a certain height, hedges trimmed at least once every 2 weeks, limited paint colors for shutters. Just the essentials to maintain uniformity and property value." "Sounds thorough," I commented, trying to maintain civility. "It is," she said with a self-assured nod. "We take pride in upholding these standards. If you ever have questions, I'm always available. And of course, the monthly dues must be paid on time. It's in the welcome packet you'll find at your front door." She pulled out a pastel envelope from her binder and handed it to me. "Oh, and I noticed your moving truck was partially on the lawn this morning. We have a rule against vehicles on the grass. I'd hate to start your residency with a warning, so please take care next time." It took me a fraction of a second to realize she was borderline scolding me for a simple oversight on the very day I was moving in. My eyebrows rose. "Understood. I'll watch out for that." "Excellent," she said, plastering a wide grin that almost seemed predatory. "Welcome to Primrose Gardens." With that, she pivoted sharply and strode away, binder tucked under her arm. I exhaled, somewhat amused and somewhat wary. I should have guessed that a woman nicknamed Karen in the neighborhood might be trouble. Little did I know how deeply her trouble would run. A few days passed in relative peace. Diana and I settled in. We arranged our furniture, hung artwork, and discovered the local farmer's market. The neighbors on our immediate left, Aaron and Bethany Hyde, invited us over for coffee. They were friendly, telling us about local hiking trails and the best pizza in town. Inevitably, the topic turned to Belinda Farnett. "You might as well brace yourself," Aaron joked. "She takes the HOA presidency like it's the White House. She'll be on you for every tiny infraction." Bethany gave a little grimace. "She's not malicious, not usually. She just loves control." I was grateful for their honesty. If there was one thing I knew from my years in homicide, it's that seemingly trivial issues can escalate quickly under the wrong circumstances. Still, I didn't expect murder. Not from this suburban haven. It started small. Belinda, Karen, as most called her, left notes at our door. They were always politely worded but had a passive-aggressive undertone. A note about our trash cans. They must be out no earlier than 6 p.m. the night before collection. Yours were out at 5:45 p.m. last night. Another note about the color of our garden gnome. Please adhere to neutral colors for outdoor decor to match the community palette. Diana shook her head, incredulous. "She's serious about these minute details, isn't she?" "Yes," I replied grimly. "But as long as we comply, maybe she'll back off." I had no intention of letting her provoke me. My job required a level head under much more dire circumstances, so I could handle a controlling HOA president. That was my mindset. But within a month, I realized Karen's meddling wasn't just a matter of paint colors and trash schedules. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, warm with a slight breeze. Diana and I were in the front yard planting a few azaleas. I was halfway through digging when Karen's voice sliced through the air. "Excuse me, Mr. Morgan," she called, striding up the sidewalk. She carried her ever-present binder, the corners of her mouth turned down in disapproval. I stood, leaning on my shovel. "Yes." She gestured to the azaleas with her pen. "I see you're planting shrubs. Are you aware that any changes to front yard landscaping require prior approval from the HOA's landscaping committee?" I glanced at Diana, who raised an eyebrow. Then I looked back to Karen, measured in my response. I didn't realize I needed official approval for a few shrubs. It's not a major construction project. She clucked her tongue. "We have guidelines, Mr. Morgan. It's about visual harmony. We can't have everyone planting whatever they want, wherever they want, or it'd be chaos." I bit back a retort. "I'm happy to fill out any required paperwork. Where do I get it?" Karen flipped open her binder, rifling through color-coded pages. "Here," she said, pulling out a crisp form. "You'll need to submit photos, the proposed layout, and get sign-off from me and 2 other board members." Diana took the form, scanning it. "This is a lot just for planting azaleas," she murmured. Karen ignored her tone. "Better to follow procedure, dear," she said condescendingly to Diana, then turned back to me. "One other thing. That car of yours." I stiffened. "What about it?" She waved a dismissive hand. "It's not an approved shade. The guidelines specify neutral automotive tones for vehicles regularly parked in driveways. Bright red is allowed only with a special variance." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're telling me the color of my car violates HOA rules? That's a factory standard red." She gave a thin smile. "Some things are not obvious until you review the entire handbook. You might consider keeping it in your garage or painting it. I'm only doing my job to maintain the aesthetic integrity of Primrose Gardens." Diana's jaw dropped. "That's insane." Karen shrugged. "Insanity or not, those are the guidelines. You'll find them all in Section 5, subsection B." She tapped the binder for emphasis. At that moment, I realized we were dealing with something more than a typical overzealous HOA head. This was a woman who believed she had the right to control every aspect of other people's lives, down to the color of a car. Given my background, I silently reminded myself to remain calm, not to escalate. For that day, I simply said, "We'll review the guidelines and submit any required forms." Karen smiled, apparently appeased. "Wonderful. Don't forget, the monthly HOA meeting is next Thursday at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. Attendance is mandatory for all new residents. Have a nice day." She walked off, binder clutched in a way that reminded me of a judge leaving the courtroom after slamming down a gavel. Diana and I exchanged looks. "This is too much," she said. I nodded, a slow burn of frustration in my gut. "We'll figure out how to handle it." Little did I know that confrontation over azaleas was only the tip of the iceberg. Over the next week, we noticed odd occurrences around the house. A couple of our newly planted azaleas mysteriously disappeared overnight. Our welcome mat was moved several inches from where we usually placed it. Diana's garden shears vanished. At first, I assumed it was just teen pranks or a bored thief. But a low-level suspicion formed that maybe someone in the neighborhood wanted to rattle us. Then came a note taped to our door in bold letters. "Stick to the guidelines. We don't want trouble here." No signature, of course. No official HOA letterhead. Just a direct warning. My detective instincts flared. Had Karen left this note herself, or had she manipulated someone else to do her dirty work? The words implied a threat, albeit vague. Diana was visibly unnerved. "This is borderline harassment," she said. "Should we call the police?" "I am the police," I replied, half joking. "But if we file an official complaint, it might escalate. Let me do some quiet investigating first." That evening, I circled the block after dark, noticing which houses had security cameras or vantage points. I jotted them in my notebook. If anything serious happened, I'd see if those cameras caught suspicious activity. Stonebridge County was generally low crime, so the neighbors usually didn't worry about petty vandalism. But if we were being targeted, it was best to be prepared. Still, I had no direct evidence linking the threats to Karen. And I had bigger responsibilities at the station, investigating a homicide case in a neighboring township. So I tried to put the HOA nonsense out of my mind, at least for the moment. A few weeks later, the tension in Primrose Gardens ramped up. We began hearing rumors of Karen's antagonism toward multiple residents, not just us. She had apparently pressured one family to repaint their front door twice in a single month because she claimed the shade of gray was too dark. Another neighbor, an older widow named Mrs. Harper, complained that Karen insisted she remove a small bird bath from her yard because it was not consistent with the neighborhood theme. At the station, I worked late hours on a tricky homicide investigation, but I couldn't completely ignore the developments at home. Diana frequently texted me about new incidents, more notes, new so-called violations that Karen cited, or weird stares from certain board members we encountered in the neighborhood. One Thursday evening, I wrapped up a meeting with my homicide unit and headed to the monthly HOA gathering, as we were once again mandated to attend. The clubhouse was an airy, modern building at the neighborhood center. Inside, neatly arranged rows of chairs faced a podium. A large HOA logo was projected on a screen behind the stage. Karen stood at the podium, wearing a form-fitting blazer and a commanding smile. She welcomed everyone with her usual brand of forced cheeriness. The meeting covered topics like landscaping budgets, community garage sale dates, and updates on new residents. Then it shifted to compliance reviews. One by one, Karen listed alleged infractions: a fence that was half an inch too tall, a basketball hoop that was not stored away quickly enough after use, recycling bins placed at the curb too early. She called up each violator to publicly explain themselves. Diana and I exchanged uneasy glances. This was humiliating, like a public shaming session. When our names were called, I stood, controlling the flicker of annoyance in my chest. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan," Karen began, "your application for front yard landscaping was filed late. Additionally, the color of your vehicle has not been addressed, in clear disregard for the guidelines set forth by the board. Would you care to explain yourself before we impose a fine?" I took a step forward. "We're still in the process of exploring options for repainting or garage parking," I said evenly. "As for the landscaping form, we submitted it as soon as we could, but it took some time to complete your thorough requirements." Karen's lips pursed. "The board requires timely compliance. Failure to do so leads to consequences. We can't make exceptions or we risk chaos." At that point, I couldn't hold back. "I find it excessive. This is a neighborhood, not a dictatorship. Might we consider a gentler approach to compliance?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Morgan, if you have issues with our structure, you're welcome to raise them at the next bylaw amendment session. For now, we must respect the regulations. Unless," her tone turned icy, "unless you think you're above them." Silence fell. I felt my jaw tighten. In my years of law enforcement, I'd faced criminals, sociopaths, and bullies. This was a new breed of intimidation. a petty tyrant wearing a polished facade. I simply replied, "No one's above the law, or above reason." With that, Karen gave a mirthless smile and moved on to the next item. The tension, however, lingered thick in the air. Little did I know that behind the scenes, Karen's frustration with me was morphing into something far darker than petty HOA feuds. After that public showdown, the harassment escalated. Someone slashed 2 of my car tires in the driveway. The next day, we received an anonymous letter with cutout magazine letters forming the message, "We warned you. Fall in line or face the consequences." I could not ignore these actions any longer. Though part of me suspected Karen was orchestrating it, I had zero tangible proof. Anyone in the neighborhood could be working on her behalf, intentionally or because they believed they were protecting Primrose Gardens. I discreetly informed my boss, Captain Harvey, about the threats. He was concerned, but there was little he could do without concrete evidence or a direct link to Karen. He suggested installing security cameras around my property. I did exactly that, placing cameras in hidden corners of the front yard, the backyard, and near the garage. If anyone tried to vandalize our property again, we'd catch them on tape. Meanwhile, I continued investigating homicide cases at work. Ironically, being the new chief investigator in the county's Homicide Division meant I was no stranger to threats, just not typically from a suburban HOA. Still, I pressed on, balancing my official duties with the uneasy feeling that my own home was under siege by a group led by a petty tyrant. Weeks passed, and the cameras recorded nothing suspicious. I began wondering if the intimidation campaign had eased off or if the culprits realized we'd installed security. Then one crisp autumn evening, everything changed. It was a Friday night. Diana had gone to visit her parents for the weekend. I was alone at the house, finishing some case files. The hush of night was broken only by the soft hum of the living room heater. Around 10:30 p.m., I stepped outside to take the trash to the curb. Careful, ironically, not to set it out too early, thanks to Karen's rules. As I approached the sidewalk, something caught my peripheral vision, a flicker of movement behind a hedge. Before I could fully react, a dark figure lunged toward me. There was a sudden flash of metal in the dim glow of the streetlight. Instincts honed by years of detective work kicked in. I swung the trash can as a barrier, but the assailant knocked it aside with surprising force. My heart pounded. I barely sidestepped a knife thrust aimed at my abdomen. The figure lunged again, slicing the air near my side. In a fluid motion, I pivoted and kicked, connecting with the attacker's wrist. The knife clattered to the ground. They stumbled, swore under their breath, then turned and sprinted into the night. My own adrenaline surge prevented me from giving chase immediately. It took me a second to recover. By the time I grabbed a flashlight and rushed down the street, the assailant was gone, lost in the rows of near-identical houses, maybe slipping through a side yard. Heart thudding, I retrieved the discarded knife. A standard kitchen knife with black duct tape wrapped around the handle. No immediate identifying marks. I called 911 and reported the assault. Patrol officers arrived, took statements, checked the area, but found no trace of the suspect. The main question was, who orchestrated this? When we reviewed my security footage, we caught only a shadowy figure in a hood, strolling down the sidewalk. They wore gloves, long sleeves, and a mask covering the lower half of their face. Not enough to identify them. Though the footage was grainy, one detail stood out. The attacker was likely a woman. The build and height suggested as much, though not conclusively. My mind flickered to Karen, but I had to be realistic. She could have easily hired someone else. Still, the attempt on my life made me realize I was facing more than petty vandalism. This was full-blown violence. In the days following the attack, Karen seemed oddly preoccupied. She avoided me whenever I passed her on the street. If we did make eye contact, she offered a tight, uncomfortable smile. The rest of the HOA board, too, acted strange, some averting their eyes, others giving me forced politeness. Word of my assault had spread through the neighborhood rumor mill, but no one wanted to discuss it openly. I decided to do some quiet background digging on Karen. Using police databases, legally, but discreetly, I discovered she had a minor record in her 20s for trespassing and misdemeanor assault. Both charges dropped before trial. Nothing too damning, but it hinted at a history of aggressive behavior. She had also been embroiled in multiple civil suits, disputes with previous neighbors and other subdivisions, even a restraining order from an ex-colleague who accused her of harassment. Fascinating. This was not your average soccer mom, type overzealous with HOA rules. One evening, as I typed notes on my laptop, I received a call from Mrs. Harper, the widow whose birdbath Karen had forced her to remove. Her voice trembled with emotion. Mr. Morgan, I don't know who else to call. I found something in my mailbox this morning. I pressed the phone to my ear. What's wrong, Mrs. Harper? Another threat. She inhaled shakily. A letter telling me that if I don't testify against you at the next HOA meeting, I'll face consequences. They said I should claim you've been breaking into people's yards, tampering with properties. My jaw clenched. That's absurd. Did they sign the letter? No. It was typed, placed in my mailbox with no return address. But it had the HOA letterhead. I'm sure it was forged. Who else would do this? I sighed. The pattern was clear: intimidation, blackmail, all in an effort to paint me as the neighborhood villain. Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Harper. Could you bring that letter to me? Don't show it to anyone else. I'll run some tests. She agreed. Once I had the letter, my initial analysis showed nothing conclusive. No clear fingerprints, no traceable marks. But I recognized the same brand of intimidation, likely orchestrated by the same mind behind the other incidents. Karen, or someone closely aligned with her, was turning neighbors against me. But why the escalation to attempted murder? Perhaps my refusal to back down threatened her sense of power. Perhaps she feared I'd expose something more sinister about her past. I resolved to gather more evidence before making a move. While the intimidation campaign grew, I had to balance my professional duties at the Homicide Division. One morning, a fresh homicide case landed on my desk. A local man found stabbed to death in a vacant lot near the next county line. At first glance, it seemed unrelated to Primrose Gardens, until I noticed the victim's name: Todd Wells. Todd Wells was a private investigator based out of Stonebridge County. Rumor had it he took on less than savory jobs, sometimes dabbling in intimidation and blackmail. My detective sense prickled. Could Todd have been the same person who attacked me? If so, who hired him? I learned that Todd's last known client was none other than Karen Farnett. She'd apparently hired him for some background checks on new neighbors. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. Had she hired Todd to follow or threaten me? And had their arrangement turned sour, resulting in Todd's death? Shaken by this revelation, I dug deeper. The phone records from Todd's business line showed numerous calls to Karen over the last 2 months, including a surge in calls the day before Todd was found dead. This was a major break, strong circumstantial evidence that Karen was involved in something nefarious. But I had to tread carefully. Confronting Karen with partial evidence might lead her to destroy more incriminating proof or skip town. I needed a covert approach, so I quietly assembled an investigative team within my department, swearing them to secrecy. We began building a detailed timeline of Karen's movements, phone calls, financial transactions, everything that could tie her to Todd Wells and, possibly, to an attempted murder plot on me. What I uncovered next was a swirl of suspicious bank withdrawals from Karen's account, all in round amounts consistent with hush money or payoffs. This indicated that she might have hired Todd for more than mere background checks. She might have contracted him to do the dirty work, like threatening me or worse. But how did Todd end up stabbed to death? If Karen orchestrated that, she'd escalated from petty extortion to actual homicide. If so, she had no idea she was tangling with a seasoned homicide investigator. I felt a strange mixture of resolve and fury. This wasn't just about me or my fiancé anymore. A man was dead, and Karen was in my crosshairs as the prime suspect. Amid these discoveries, I combed through the hidden security footage from around my own house, from the night Todd attacked me. One camera had a partial vantage down the street. While analyzing the frames, something startling emerged: a distant glimpse of a second figure waiting near a silver sedan. The figure's posture, hair color, and outline were eerily similar to Karen's. She was too far for an easy ID, but the silver sedan matched the exact make and model registered to Karen Farnett, a 2017 silver Mercedes E-Class. The partial license plate seen in the footage corresponded to hers. This strongly suggested Karen had been present on the street when I was attacked. Why? Possibly to ensure the job was done. Possibly to dispose of evidence. This was no longer just about HOA harassment. Karen was complicit in an attempted murder against a law enforcement officer. The irony was so thick, I could taste it. She had no clue I was the Chief Investigator of the Homicide Division. She thought I was just some random detective with minimal clout. Armed with these findings, I prepared a search warrant application. I planned to execute it without tipping off Karen. If I got inside her house, I might find further evidence, phone records, possibly the murder weapon from Todd Wells's case if she orchestrated his killing. But I needed more puzzle pieces to ensure a judge would sign off on the warrant. Then came a stroke of luck. A neighbor named Timothy Brown came forward. Timothy had installed a top-notch security system in his backyard, which bordered a small walkway near Karen's property. He offered to let me review his footage from recent weeks. As I combed through the videos, a chilling scene played out. Todd Wells, easily identifiable, walking with Karen along the walkway late one evening. They seemed to be arguing. Karen shoved him, and he pointed an accusing finger at her. No sound, just visuals. Then they parted ways. Karen's face twisted in fury. This snippet placed them together shortly before Todd's death. Combined with the phone records, it was enough to finalize my warrant application. On a crisp Saturday morning, I gathered a small team of plainclothes officers. We drove unmarked cars into Primrose Gardens. While half the team discreetly blocked off the entrance to Karen Street, I approached her door with the signed search warrant. To my surprise, Karen answered the door in sweatpants and a disheveled t-shirt, looking vastly different from her usual polished appearance. Her eyes widened. "Detective Morgan, what is this?" I held up the warrant. "Miss Farnett, we have a court order to search your property. Please step aside." Karen's face paled. For a moment, I caught a flash of genuine fear, quickly replaced by anger. "On what grounds?" "You have no right." One of my colleagues, Officer Patterson, gently moved her aside. "We do, ma'am. Failure to comply is a criminal offense." Karen trembled, but allowed us in. Our team spread out, looking for anything that could tie her to the assault on me and the murder of Todd Wells. Karen hovered, trying to watch our every move. She barked protests about how this was illegal or a violation of her privacy. I ignored her. We searched her study, rummaged through her desk drawers. In a locked cabinet, we found a trove of suspicious documents, receipts for large cash withdrawals, Todd Wells's business card with a phone number scrawled on it, and even a slip of paper with my address, circled in red marker, annotated with the phrase, "Must handle ASAP." My heart pounded. This was it, the smoking gun that suggested she'd targeted me. Yet we still lacked direct proof she killed Todd. Then, behind a bookshelf in her living room, Patterson discovered a small hidden compartment. Within it lay a charred piece of cloth, possibly a shirt or rag, stained with what looked like dried blood. Next to it was a half-burned spiral notebook. We also found a digital video recorder, apparently from a personal security system. Karen lunged, shrieking, "You can't take that. It's my private property." We seized it all. Once we loaded the evidence into evidence bags, I turned to Karen, who stood near her kitchen counter, tears of rage pooling in her eyes. "Ms. Farnett, you're not under arrest yet," I told her, "but we'll be taking you in for questioning." She let out a hollow laugh. "This is outrageous. This is a conspiracy to ruin me. I am the president of the Primrose Gardens HOA. You can't do this to me." I simply gestured to the officers. "Escort her to the station, please." As they led her away, a swirl of conflicting emotions welled within me. Relief that we might be closing in on justice. Anger that I'd been forced to play cat and mouse with a suburban tyrant. And an icy determination to see this through. At the station, I interviewed Karen. She stonewalled me, claiming ignorance of Todd Wells's murder and denying any knowledge of the attack on me. "I don't know who Todd Wells is," she insisted, even though we had phone records placing them in frequent contact. But then I confronted her with the newly recovered evidence. Her face changed color several times. I pressed her. "We know you hired Todd. We know you were present when he attacked me. And we have you on tape arguing with him shortly before his death. Why did you kill him? Did he blackmail you?" Karen's composure cracked. I didn't kill him," she said hoarsely. "I only hired him to run background checks on new neighbors. He was supposed to gather dirt on you, so I could remove you from the neighborhood. You were a threat to our way of life. But murder? That's insane. I never told him to murder anyone." Her eyes flitted about, searching for an escape. I hammered on. "Then why did Todd end up dead with a knife wound? Why was your sedan spotted near his location the night he died? And what about the half-burned notebook we found in your living room? Why destroy your security footage if you had nothing to hide?" Karen's lips trembled. I only tried to erase evidence that I'd been in contact with Todd. I didn't want it to look bad. Looks a lot worse that you tried to destroy it, I pointed out. If you're innocent of murder, who do you think killed Todd? She sank into the metal chair, swallowing hard. Then she tried to twist the narrative. Maybe he had other enemies? Maybe he tried to double-cross me, and someone else did it. I only wanted him to gather dirt on you, force you out of Primrose Gardens. You have no idea how important it is to maintain order. You've been defying me since day one. I had to protect the neighborhood. I stared at her, stunned by her warped sense of justification. So you hired a private investigator with a shady track record to dig up dirt, blackmail, or threaten me out of the neighborhood. That's a crime in itself. Then you accompanied him the night he tried to stab me, or at least oversaw it from your car. You do realize you've crossed the line from petty harassment into attempted murder, correct? She shook her head fervently. No, that wasn't the plan. He told me he was just going to scare you, make you see reason. I never agreed to kill you. But you watched him try. My voice was steady, ice cold. You did nothing. And when it failed, Todd ended up dead. Now you're the prime suspect in his homicide. Either you killed him to tie up loose ends, or your arrangement fell apart, and someone else is in the mix. Either way, you're in deep trouble. Karen burst into hysterical sobs. But tears or not, she gave us nothing more on Todd's actual killer. We had the means, the motive, and the evidence of a cover-up. It was enough to charge her with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, obstruction of justice, and possibly first-degree murder if we tied the final knot in Todd's death. Still, part of me wondered, was Karen truly the one who drove that knife into Todd's chest, or had she hired a second accomplice? That question lingered as we booked her. She shrieked about her rights, threatened lawsuits, and insisted she was the victim. But the wheels of justice had begun to turn. Despite Karen's arrest, the case against her for Todd's homicide needed stronger physical evidence linking her to the actual killing. We had phone calls, suspicious bank withdrawals, and the scorched remains of her personal recordings, plus her attempt on my life. Yet the specific details of Todd's murder were elusive. While Karen sat in a jail cell, refusing further cooperation, I had my team comb through Todd's final movements. GPS data from Todd's car placed him near an abandoned construction site the night he died. CCTV from a nearby gas station captured him driving away alone. But 45 minutes later, he was found stabbed in a vacant lot adjacent to the same construction site. Phone records showed no calls from Karen in that 45-minute window. Instead, there was a flurry of texts from a burner phone. We managed to retrieve partial data from Todd's phone, including ominous messages. You've outlived your usefulness. Deliver or pay the price. Those texts were traced to a burner phone purchased at a convenience store an hour away. Security footage from that store showed someone in a hooded sweatshirt, face obscured. But we recognized the silver sedan parked outside, and the partial license matched Karen's plate again. This was enough to place Karen at the phone's point of purchase. She likely used the burner phone to threaten Todd before luring him to the vacant lot, where she, or someone working for her, finished the job. We tested the burnt cloth found in Karen's hidden compartment. It had Todd's blood on it. The partial spiral notebook pages, once recovered by forensics, revealed ominous scribbles referencing final payment, Morgan problem, and tie-up, all ends. The handwriting matched Karen's. This was as close to a confession as we'd likely get. Karen plotting the demise of Todd and me, all to maintain her stranglehold over a suburban HOA. Unbelievable. With this evidence, we upgraded the charges: premeditated murder in Todd's death, conspiracy, and attempted murder for her role in my attack. The local DA was livid over the brazenness. Meanwhile, Primrose Gardens residents were reeling, having learned that their Karen was behind a murder plot. News broke of Karen's arrest, splashing across local media. HOA president charged with murder and attempted murder of detective. The scandal rocked the once tranquil Primrose Gardens. Neighbors who had once supported Karen, or at least tolerated her, were stunned into disbelief. Some insisted there must be an explanation. Others realized, with dawning horror, that their petty HOA president had escalated her tyranny into lethal violence. A few days after the arrest, I returned home from the station to find a gathering of neighbors on my front lawn. Mr. and Mrs. Hyde, Mrs. Harper, and others who'd been victims of Karen's overreach. They apologized for not speaking up sooner about her intimidation. Some had known she was unhinged, but never imagined murder. I reassured them it wasn't their fault. Karen's brand of intimidation was designed to isolate and silence. You did the right thing by coming forward now, I said gently. In the following weeks, the HOA scrambled to replace Karen. A temporary board took over, pledging to relax the strictest rules and restore sanity. Meanwhile, local authorities froze Karen's assets, seizing her home pending trial, as it was suspected she'd used HOA funds for personal schemes. Primrose Gardens slowly emerged from the shadow of her tyranny. Yet for me, the ordeal was still ongoing. I was the lead investigator in the homicide case, building the final pieces of evidence. A swirl of new tips and statements emerged, revealing that Karen had systematically extorted or blackmailed certain neighbors over the years, using their personal secrets as leverage. Todd Wells had apparently been instrumental in gathering dirt. And when Todd threatened to blackmail Karen herself, likely demanding more money or else he'd expose her, she eliminated him. Classic, but chilling. The trial date arrived faster than I expected, fueled by the DA's determination to secure justice. The courthouse was flooded with journalists and curious onlookers. Karen appeared in an orange jumpsuit, her once perfectly coiffed hair now limp around her shoulders. She glared at me across the room. I took the stand, describing the events leading up to my assault, the hidden camera footage, and the evidence tying Karen to Todd's murder. Her defense attorney tried to discredit me, claiming I had a personal vendetta since she was merely enforcing HOA rules. But the prosecution, armed with damning physical evidence and witness statements, systematically dismantled that narrative. Crucially, forensics testified that the burnt cloth in Karen's hidden compartment matched Todd's blood type and DNA, and partial notes recovered from the fire spelled out her plan for total elimination. They argued it referred both to me and Todd. The phone records, the burner phone purchase, and the scuffled footprints near the murder site, which matched the brand and size of Karen's custom shoe order, all pinned the blame on her. When the jury deliberated, I felt a surge of anxiety. Despite all the evidence, there's always a risk of a not guilty verdict if the defense sows enough doubt. But the next day, the jury foreperson stood and read the verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of attempted murder. Guilty of conspiracy and destruction of evidence. Karen let out a guttural wail. The judge, citing her utter disregard for human life and brazen attempts to murder a law enforcement officer, imposed the maximum sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder, plus additional years for the other charges. A hush fell over the courtroom. Then the press cameras clicked in rapid succession, capturing the face of the woman once known simply as the neighborhood Karen. She was led away in handcuffs, tears streaming down her cheeks, all illusions of control shattered. As part of the sentencing and restitution, the court seized Karen's house in Primrose Gardens and other assets purchased with misappropriated funds. All that property went under foreclosure or was redistributed as part of the legal process. Neighbors who once feared her found a sense of closure, knowing she could no longer terrorize them. The new HOA board wasted no time rolling back draconian rules. People rejoiced, painting their houses in brighter colors, planting whatever flowers they pleased, and parking red cars out in the open without fear of fines. A wave of relief swept the once stifled community. Personally, I felt a mix of triumph and sadness. Lives had been lost and threatened because of one woman's obsession with power and control. But at least justice was served. Diana and I tried to refocus on building a peaceful home life. My superiors at the station commended my work, though they also noted how surreal it was that I'd ended up investigating my own HOA president for homicide. I resumed my normal duties, aware that no future case could be quite as bizarre as unraveling a suburban murder plot orchestrated by a tyrannical HOA president. Karen's name faded from daily conversation, replaced by new neighborhood gossip about improvements and block parties. But occasionally, I drive by her old home and feel a chill, remembering the knife aimed at my chest, the scorched evidence in her secret hideaway, and her chilling final expression in court. Months after Karen's conviction, the nights in Primrose Gardens were tranquil once again. Families walked their dogs in the evening, children played street hockey, and front porches glowed with warm lights. No more clandestine threats or bullying letters. The tension that once curdled the air had vanished. We held a neighborhood cookout to celebrate the new sense of freedom. Mrs. Harper finally got to put a brand new bird bath in her garden. This time, a grand piece featuring decorative stone doves. Mr. Hyde joked about repainting his front door neon green, just because he could, although he stuck with a tasteful pale yellow in the end. Neighbors expressed gratitude for my persistence. Some teased me, saying they never imagined their local detective would end up busting a homicide ring within the HOA. I told them it was all in a day's work, though privately, I prayed we'd never have a day like that again. Diana and I made the most of the restored calm. We hosted small gatherings, inviting the friends we'd made during the ordeal. Our wedding plans, once overshadowed by the chaos, moved forward. We decided to have a small ceremony in Primrose Gardens' newly renovated community garden, a fitting place to symbolize renewal after destruction. Whenever I stepped outside at night, I no longer carried the old apprehension that someone lurked behind the hedges. I still took precautions, locks, cameras, awareness. But that acute fear dissolved, replaced by the confidence that justice had prevailed. In the months and years that followed, Karen's story became something of an urban legend within Stonebridge County. People whispered about the HOA Karen, who tried to kill a detective and ended up in prison for life. Some media outlets sensationalized the tale. Overbearing HOA president commits murder to protect neighborhood values. Eventually, the headlines faded, overshadowed by more current events. Primrose Gardens, however, remembered. The new HOA bylaws included checks and balances to prevent any future president from wielding absolute power. The community soared in popularity, ironically benefiting from the publicity. Families moved in, attracted by the newly warm and inviting environment. The vestiges of Karen's reign, onerous fines, bizarre paint color mandates, vanished, replaced by a more reasonable set of guidelines. Diana and I remained in Primrose Gardens, forging a truly happy life. We turned our house into a cozy home, with bright flowers, a bright red car in the driveway, and the knowledge that no one could dictate how we lived. Whenever we strolled past the park, we reflected on the twists of fate that had led us here. From city life to an HOA dispute that escalated into a murder conspiracy, culminating in a sensational trial that left Karen behind bars. Sometimes, I thought of Todd Wells, the private investigator whose life ended on that vacant lot. His fate was tragic, entangled in Karen's mania for control. If only he'd realized she was playing a deadlier game than he expected. If only he hadn't tried to blackmail her in return. Still, the final chapter belonged to justice. Karen Farnett, Karen, as the neighborhood once snidely called her, had set out to assassinate me, only to discover that I was the chief investigator of the Homicide Division. In her arrogance, she believed she could cover her tracks by destroying security footage and forging documents. But a killer who tries to hide evidence from a seasoned homicide detective stands little chance of success. Her grand plan crumbled under the weight of forensic science, witness testimony, and her own ill-conceived attempts at a cover-up. And so it ended, with Karen in prison, her property confiscated, and her name synonymous with the darkest chapter of Primrose Gardens' history. The community emerged stronger, united by the knowledge that tyranny can hide in the unlikeliest of places, but so can courage and resilience. As for me, Alec Morgan, I continued leading the Homicide Division with renewed vigor. I had stared down corruption in the place I called home, reminding me that justice doesn't always wear a convenient face. Sometimes, it hides behind manicured lawns and a charming suburban facade. But no facade is airtight. Eventually, the truth finds a way through. On the eve of our wedding, Diana and I stood on our porch, admiring the sunset over the tidy streets. We were at peace, grateful for every neighbor who joined us in forging a brighter future. In the hush of twilight, I took Diana's hand and smiled. Here's to a life free from fear. She squeezed my hand back. Here's to us, and to Primrose Gardens' second chance. With that, we stepped inside, closing the door on the memory of Karen's reign and opening a new chapter in a neighborhood finally at peace.